Well, playing both classical and jazz has certain advantages and disadvantages. I don't really see myself as primarily one or the other. I feel like my studies have been divided very, very equally. There are certain things I do better than other things. For example, I think I'm a better soloist than I am an orchestral player. It's just my background, and I'm a better post-bop player than I am a Dixieland player, for example. But in terms of the general idioms of jazz or classical, I don't think I necessarily do one better than the other. Generally, in a certain week I might. For example, if I've had a few nights in a jazz club and then I have to go play the Haydn Trumpet Concerto, maybe it's not going to be as polished as it could be. Or if I've been shedding all this classical music, I might get a little rusty with my jazz stuff. But I'm very careful in my practicing to try to keep everything in balance as much as possible. On the classical side, I think that the advantage for my jazz playing is that I think most of my just the basic approach to the instrument, my basic facility and sound production is really crafted on the classical side, and I think it helps me to keep a real healthy relationship with the instrument. On the jazz side, I feel like the whole element of improvisation and of rhythmic freedom is something that I try to bring into the classical arena. For example, when I do Baroque or classical concertos, I typically improvise my cadenzas, and I've had people compose pieces for me with cadenzas that are improvised. And so there's that element. Also the idea that I feel like the greatest classical performers sound like they're improvising when they play even these great classic pieces. I think of hearing Yo-Yo Ma play a cello concerto, and he plays it as if he's improvising it on the spot. And I feel like I've become better at that in the classical setting through my work as a jazz player. I've been fortunate to have made 4 solo recordings. The first one was done back in 1992. It's called The Powers That Be. And it was a jazz effort with a lot of the guys I was playing with in Chicago at the time. The second one is called Pandora's Pocket. It was another jazz recording, again with a lot of the Chicago players I was playing. I think it really shows a fair amount of growth between the two projects. I was starting to figure out what I was doing a little more, And then my third recording is called Masks, and it was my first classical solo recording, and it's all new music by American composers, including the piece that's become a standard by Dana Wilson called Masks, 3-movement work, a couple of my pieces, and a number of other works for solo trumpet or trumpet and piano or trumpet and computer. And my most recent recording is called Jazz Upstairs, live at the Guru Bar, and it was recorded in Athens with 4 great Greek jazz musicians. We played for 4 nights in March of 2006 and chose 70 minutes of music to put on a CD. One of the most important formative experiences for me was joining Rhythm and Brass, which to this day I think musically is the best thing I've ever been involved with. I've been so lucky to be involved with these 5 guys since 1995. It really marked the turning point for me from being a freelance musician, essentially a studio musician and playing jazz and playing classical in various settings, to becoming a concert performer. It was my first chance to really tour internationally. And all those guys have been great teachers to me. Tom Brantley, Alex Shuhan, Charles Villarubia, David Gluck, Whiff Rudd. Great friends, great teachers. They're all like brothers. And all of them have taught me so much musically. I can't even tell you. Um, Even just the music that they would bring out on the road when we were, driving around in the van, popping things in the CD player. I'd learn about new bands every time we'd go on tour, and everything that people would bring to the table as arrangers and composers, and just as creative individuals, has really shaped what I've done for more than a decade now. Playing with rhythm and brass has been, I would say, a uniquely eclectic experience for me. It's the only rule we have for us deciding what to program is A, do we like the piece, and B, can we make it sound good? And so we really honor these two things in choosing our music. So it means that we've played anything from madrigals by Josquin to Contrapuncti by Bach, music of Shostakovich, music of Pink Floyd, music of Thelonious Monk. We try to we really want to make sure we can make the music work, because I think there's every tendency to do transcriptions and to have it be sort of a watering down of the music. And I think we've always wanted to avoid that. We want to make sure there's some sort of added value to having a six-piece ensemble with 5 brass and percussion to perform any piece of music, whether it's music by the Beatles or it's music by Eric Satie. It doesn't matter. It has to be. We have to bring something different to the table. If we feel like we're not doing that, then the piece kind of leaves our repertoire, and we focus on other things that we feel like we can really present and do justice to in the right way. My first exposure to Yamaha trumpets was through rhythm and brass. When I auditioned for the group back in 1995, they had asked me, would you be willing to play all Yamaha instruments? And at first I was a little uncertain because I hadn't really played the horns, and I was perfectly happy with the horns that I had. But when I showed up at the factory to try the horns out, it was a very pleasant surprise. I mean, all the horns felt great, and it was a real easy transition to learn how to play them. And I'd show up on gigs in Chicago after this, and people would be making nice comments about my sound. They say, "Man, you sound better. You've been practicing?" I'm like, "No, I got a new horn." But I took it as a compliment anyway. And since then, I've really been pleased, really pleased with my relationship with Yamaha, to see how the company does business, the involvement in education, the involvement, the real commitment to quality and professionalism has really been a motivation to me as a player. And with each new generation of horns, it's really impressive to see the great work that is being done. Every time I get a new horn, I'm getting the same kind of comments from people about the better sound, about the more interesting sound. These days, what I find is that, and I have a pretty large set of horns now because, especially on the classical side, there's this whole mess of horns that we have to use as trumpet players on occasion. In addition to the 4 horns I usually play, the B flat, the C, and I have the Chicago Xeno models, artist models of each of those, flugelhorn and piccolo trumpet. I also have a DE flat, which is a bit of an older generation of horn, but it's an amazing horn. It's funny, every time I play a concerto with this E flat, the conductor thinks is confused by the sound. It sounds like a bigger horn. It's got such a warm sound. And I also have an FG trumpet. I've got a couple of cornets. So it's been very easy to be very consistent with using the Yamaha horns because they really don't disappoint. Any kind of sound I'm trying to get, any kind of style I'm trying to fit into, I find that the horns are designed in such a way that it's very easy to play very consistently and to make the music I'm trying to make. Well, the music I listen to these days kind of reflects my life. It's very diverse. I'm not really a purist in any sense in terms of classical music or jazz. While I keep my love of the classics on both sides, jazz and classical, and I often go back to those well springs. You know, if I'm going to listen to some Louis Armstrong, I'm going to listen to some Bach or anything I can get my ears around. I'm actually a big fan of new music, whether you're talking about recent composers or you're talking about some of the modern masters of the 20th century, Stravinsky, Schoenberg, Messiaen. I'm also a big fan of Woody Shaw and Freddie Hubbard on the jazz side, Coltrane. Chris Potter is one of my favorite saxophonists alive today, a guy I'm checking out all the time. But I'm also checking out a lot of pop music. The most recent thing I was listening to driving to the airport was the Brazilian Girls, which is a really interesting band. None of them is Brazilian and only one of them is a girl. But they're really quirky, really creative. And I draw a lot of inspiration from these kinds of groups as a composer and as an improviser. Also, I've been checking out Beck for years. I've been checking out Radiohead, all sorts of artists, Fiona Apple. So to me, there's no sense of allegiance to particular idioms of music. It's all just music, and any kind of music is worth checking out to see what it has to offer to me. My one all-time favorite recording would actually probably be a surprise to brass players. It's actually by a singer named Jan Digatani, who used to be a professor at Eastman, and she was a specialist in modern music. And she has a CD out that came out in the late 80s called Music of Charles Ives. And it's simply the most gorgeous singing I've ever heard. And ever since I bought it, almost 20 years ago, it's been a real model for me in terms of how to make a sound and how to play a phrase on the trumpet. Of all the hundreds and hundreds of recordings I have in my collection, that one still sits at the very top of the list. Well, when I go to Starbucks, I am in fact a hardcore coffee drinker, but it's a little bit boring, I guess. I just get usually a massive black coffee, no cream, no sugar. I don't need any of the fancy stuff or the frou-frou stuff, and usually that's what makes me happy. If you want to be in touch with me or to learn more about what I'm doing in terms of touring or recordings, I've got a website, www.rextrumpet.com. There's also rhythm-brass.com. I also have sites on MySpace and Facebook under Rex Richardson. And my recordings are on Summit Records, and they can be purchased online at Summit, probably on Amazon.com as well. So.